From the complete Grimm's fairy tales. This is the White Snake. A long time ago there lived a king who was famed for his wisdom through all the land. Nothing was hidden from him, and it seemed as if news of the most secret things was brought to him by the air. But he had a strange custom. Every day after dinner, when the table was cleared and no one else was present, a trusty servant had brung to him one more dish. It was covered, and however, even the servant did not know what was in it. Neither did anyone know, for the king never took off the cover to eat until he was quite alone. This had gone on for a long time when one day the servant who took away the dish was overcome with such curiosity that he could not help carrying the dish into his room, and when he carefully locked the door he lifted the cover and saw the white snake lying on the dish. But when he saw it he could not deny himself the pleasure of tasting it, and so he cut off a little bit and put it into his mouth. No sooner had it touched his tongue when he heard strange whispering of voices outside the window. He went and listened, and then noticed the sparrows were chattering together and telling one another of all kinds of things which they had heard in the fields and the woods. Eating the snake had given him the power of understanding the language of animals. Now it so happened that the very day the queen lost a most beautiful ring, and suspicion of having stolen it fell onto a trusty servant who was allowed to go everywhere. The king ordered the man to be brought before him and threatened him with angry words, unless he could before the morrow point out the thief. He himself should be looked upon as guilty and executed. In vain he declared his innocence, and he was dismissed with no better an answer. In his trouble and fear he went into the courtyard and took thought as to how to help himself out of this trouble. Now some ducks were sitting together quietly by a brook and taking their rest, and whilst they were making their feathers smooth their bills, they were having confidential conversation together. The servants stood by and listened, and they were telling one another of all the places where they had been waddling around in the morning, and what good food they had found. And one said in a pitiful tone, "Something lies heavy in my stomach, as if I was eating in haste. I swallowed a ring which lay under the queen's pillow." The servant at once seized her by the neck and carried him into the kitchen, and said to the cook, "Here is a fine duck, pray kill her." "Yes," said the cook, and weighed her in his hands. She was spared no trouble to fatten herself, and had been waiting to be roasted long enough. So he cut off her head, and she was lying there dressed to be spit, and the queen's ring was found inside her. The servant could now easily prove his innocence, and the king had to make amends for all the wrongs, and allowed to ask one favor, and promised him the best place in court that he could wish for. The servant refused everything, and only asked for a horse and some money for traveling, as he had mind to see the world and go about a little. When his request was granted, he set out on his way, and then one day came to a pond where he saw three fishes caught in reeds and gasping for water. Now it is said that the fishes were dumb, and they heard them lamenting that they would perish so miserably. And he had a kind heart, and he got off his horse and put the three prisoners back into the water. They leapt with delight and put out their heads and cried to him, "We will remember you and repay you for saving us." And he rode on, and after a while it seemed that he had heard a voice in the sand at his feet. He listened and heard the ant king complain, "Why cannot folks with their clumsy beasts keep off of our bodies? That stupid horse with his heavy hoofs has been treading down on my people without mercy." And so he turned to a side path to the ant king and cried out, "One good turn deserves another." The path led him into the wood, where he saw two old ravens standing by their nest, drawing out their young ones. "Out with you, you idle, good-for-nothing creatures," they cried, "and we cannot find food for you any longer. You are big enough, and we can provide for yourselves." But the poor young ravens lay upon the ground, flapping their wings and crying, "Oh, what helpless chicks we are! We must shift for ourselves, but we cannot fly. What can we do but lie here and starve?" And so the young fellow alighted and killed his horse with his sword and gave it to them for food. And when they were hopping about, satisfied their hunger, and cried, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." And when he had use of his own legs, and he had walked on for a long way, he came to a large city. There was a great noise and a crowd in the streets, and a man rode up on horseback, crying aloud, "The king's daughter wants a husband, but whoever seeks her hand must perform a hard task. If he does not succeed, he will forfeit his life." Many had already made the attempt in vain, and nevertheless the youth saw the king's daughter, and he was so overcome by her great beauty that he forgot all the danger, and went before the king and declared himself a suitor. So he was led out to the sea, and a gold ring was thrown into it. Before his eyes then the king ordered him to fetch up the ring, from the bottom of the sea, and added, "If you come again without it, you will be thrown in again until you perish among the waves." All the people grieved for the handsome youth, and then they went away, leaving him alone by the sea. He stood by the shore and considered what he should do, and when he suddenly saw three fishes coming toward him, and they were the very fishes' lives he had saved, and the one in the middle had a mussel in its mouth, in which it was laid on the shore at the youth's feet, and when he had taken it up and opened it, there inside lay the gold ring and the shell. Full of joy, he took it to the king and expected he would be granted his reward. But when the proud princess perceived him not to be her equal in birth, she scorned him and required him first to perform another task. He went down into the garden and strewn with her opened 10 sacks of millet seed on the grass, and she said, "Tomorrow morning in the sunrise these all must be picked up, and not a single grain to be wanting." The youth sat down in the garden and considered how it might be possible to perform this task, but he could think of nothing, and there sat sorrowfully waiting for the break of the day, when he should be put to death. But as soon as the first rays of the sun shone in the garden, he saw all 10 sacks were side by side, quite full, and not a single grain was missing. The ant king had come in the night with thousands and thousands of ants, and the grateful creatures had by great industry picked up all the millet seed and gathered them into the sacks. Presently the king's daughter herself came down into the garden and was amazed to see the young man had done the task she had given him. But she could not conquer her proud heart, and said, "Although he has performed both tasks, he shall not be my husband until he has brought me an apple from the tree of life." The king did not know where the tree of life stood, and set out, and would have been gone on forever, as long as his legs would carry him, though he had no hope of finding it. After he wandered through 3 kingdoms, he came one evening into a wood and lay down by a tree to sleep. But he overheard a rustling in the branches, and a golden apple fell into his hand. At the same time 3 ravens flew down to him and perched themselves upon his knee. "We were the 3 young ravens whom you saved from starvation, and we have grown big and heard that you are seeking the golden apple, and we flew to the sea at the end of the world, where the tree of life stands, and have brought you the apple." The youth, full of joy, set out homewards, and took the golden apple to the king's beautiful daughter, who now had no more excuses left to make. They cut the apple of life in two and ate together, and then her heart became full of love for him, and they lived in undisturbed happiness till a great age.